What's going on there, YouTube, and welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, guys, so we are basically going to continue our coverage over the X of Swords event, and we actually pick up with Chapter 10. Yes, the 10th chapter of this crossover thing that Marvel did a couple years ago. Now, remember, this is a crossover between all the X-Men titles they had at the moment. And so, of course, it makes sense for the main flagship book to be part of this crossover event. Now, with that being said, we actually do pick up with X-Men number 13. Now remember, the early chapters of this crossover is really more of the X-Men going out there and getting their swords. Because remember, there is a war coming between Arrako and COPPA. But the thing is though, 10 X-Men characters must go out there and get their swords. And right now we only have about 7. And so the question is, who is the last 3? Well, of course, it makes sense for Apocalypse to be one of those characters to get a sword because they're fighting against his children. Remember, the original 4 horsemen are back, and those 4 horsemen are the children of Apocalypse. And so it makes sense that he would get a sword. But of course, the last time we saw Apocalypse, he was badly injured because his kids whooped his butt. But either way, he needs to get a sword. So let's see what happens in chapter 10 of X of Swords. And so getting into X-Men number 13, we actually do pick up with Apocalypse on his deathbed. Like, he's dying right now, and you have Dr. Reyes and also the healer trying to heal up Apocalypse because he was badly injured by his children earlier. Now, with that being said though, you do have them try their best, but of course nothing is working. And so it's kind of like, okay, let him die. We can bring him back to life. Because remember, the X-Men do have the ability to bring someone back to life thanks to the 5 mutants who are able to make a clone body of you and download your memory into that new body. The problem is though, remember what happened earlier in X of Swords event. When Rockslide died, he died in Otherworld. And when the 5 tried to bring him back to life, he came back corrupted. That right there is very important. He came back corrupted. And so, of course, it freaked out the 5 and they kind of broke down their entire system to bare minimum. Because they're afraid that something else could possibly happen, they're remaking the entire system they had. And so if they try to bring Apocalypse back to life, it could take a day or two, which right now, the X-Men do not have that much time. And so right now, it's Dr. Reyes and also Healer just gonna have to continue to try different methods to hopefully heal him because he could possibly die very soon. If he dies, then the X-Men could lose the war. Now, this is the moment where you actually have Jonathan Hickman remind us about the past with Apocalypse, COPPA, and also Arrako. Because remember, Apocalypse used to live on COPPA, but COPPA was actually attached to Arrako. Because the 2 islands were connected, they were actually called Akora. But Apocalypse, his wife Genesis, and their children, they used to live on the island. Now, while living on the island, of course, it led to the idea that basically some powerful being appeared, cutting the island into 2, which of course led into Arrako and COPPA. But with the 2 islands being split apart from one another, of course came a bunch of powerful creatures being led by a powerful enemy. Now, Apocalypse and his wife and his children, they fought against those enemies to basically push them back where they came from, which they were able to do. But after the big battle, you had those creatures actually try to make some kind of peace treaty. Now, this is the moment where we actually do see Apocalypse sit down and talk to some of the creatures that attacked earlier. Now, with that being said, these creatures are actually holding a box, and that box is holding a mask, and that mask is the god of annihilation. Now, here's the thing though. As soon as someone wears the mask, their body is taken over by that god. And so that god uses your body as a way to speak through it. Now, of course, you do have one of the creatures put on the mask so that the god of annihilation can speak to Apocalypse and his family. Now, this is where things get very interesting. And what I mean by that is you do have the god basically tell Apocalypse that she knows the one thing they truly want. But on top of that, she tells them what she wants. Conquer. She conquers anything that's in her path. But getting back to what Apocalypse and his family want, it does seem to me that she's saying that she knows Apocalypse and his family, they want peace. That's the one thing they really want. They want peace. But on top of that right there, she says, listen, if you want peace, you have to earn that peace. Basically meaning you have to follow me back into my dimension and keep my forces at bay, because if you don't, my forces are going to basically take over your earth. And so that what led into the idea of Apocalypse family going over to Armeth to keep the forces at bay to protect the earth. Now, originally, Apocalypse wanted to go. He wanted to go into the other world, Armeth, to protect the earth because he wanted his family to survive and live on. But of course, you had Genesis said no. She wants him to stay behind. And the reason why, because she feels like her husband is too weak. But on top of that right there, she feels like her husband could be the great person the earth needs to get the mutant race ready for what to come, which of course means the X of Swords event. And so it wasn't like Apocalypse said goodbye and just walked away. In reality, Genesis and his children decided to leave and have Apocalypse stay behind. Now, on top of that right there, you do have Genesis tell Apocalypse to make sure that only the fittest survive to get them ready for the big war. Now, back in the present day, of course, we kind of find out Apocalypse was able to recover and he's back to his old self again. Apocalypse is ready to go. He's ready to get his sword. And matter of fact, he tells Charles Xavier, yo, I'll be right back because I got somewhere to go. And that somewhere to go is, of course, meaning that Apocalypse must go get his sword. And his sword is back in Egypt of all places because, of course, that makes sense for the character of Apocalypse. And really, the book ends on kind of that note right there, where you have Apocalypse actually going over to a pyramid, breaks inside the pyramid, breaks more things in the pyramid to find his sword, which of course, it is a pretty cool sword. I actually like it a lot. And it's called the Scarab, which again, I love the sword. And so of course, it's Apocalypse getting his sword and getting ready for the big event. And so now the X-Men have another character with a sword now getting ready for the big war. But this is where we actually do end the book. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. Also, if you have any suggestions on books I should read, well, please let me know in the comments below, because you never know, your suggestion could be a future video down the road. But guys, I'll see y'all next time. Later.